Another week, another massive penalty handed down by NASCAR, and according to one engine manufacturer at least, it would be pretty easy to add 100 horsepower overnight to the next-gen car. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. Hope your week is going well. Lots to get to today, but first, this episode is sponsored by Bring It On Cleaner. Bring It On is family owned and operated. They've been branding and manufacturing cleaning products and accessories for more than 30 years. Bring It On sells only quality cleaning products. Their Bring It On Cleaner can be used on windows and glass, tile and grout, tubs and sinks, and their drill brush attachments can be used on car interiors, floor mats, and rims. Head to bringitonCleaner.com to check out their many products for yourself. Be sure to use promo code SAVE at checkout for 10% off. Thank you to Bring It On Cleaner for supporting this episode of Out of the Groove. One more announcement real quick before we get going. Many of you have asked when the Out of the Groove Brennan Pool diecast will start shipping. I heard from Lionel earlier this week, and according to them, these diecasts are expected to arrive in late May. They will begin shipping out very soon after, so if you ordered one of these beautiful black and yellow 1/24th scale collectibles, you can expect them to start arriving at your doorstep by early to mid-June. I appreciate your patience, and of course I appreciate all of your support. I cannot believe that this car is going to be in so many fans' diecast collections here in just a few weeks. Absolutely blows my mind. Thank you all so much. Now let's get to the latest NASCAR news. Breaking news this afternoon, NASCAR has handed down yet another massive penalty. This one's not an L2 at least, this is an L1 penalty, but still, NASCAR took Austin Dillon's number 3 Richard Childress Racing Chevrolet back to the R&D Center after Martinsville and found illegal underwing mounting and assembly hardware. As a result, NASCAR has docked Austin Dillon 60 driver, 60 owner points, as well as 5 playoff points. Crew Chief Keith Rodden has been suspended 2 races and fined $75,000. I kind of forgot that Keith Rodden was back in the NASCAR Cup Series this year. Hadn't heard that name too much in recent years. I remember he was with Casey Kane, I think, at Hendrick towards the end of Casey Kane's Hendrick Motorsports career, and I know they didn't have their best years together. But yeah, Keith Rodden's with Richard Childress Racing and Austin Dillon now. I kind of forgot about that. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but he'll be out the next 2 weeks, assuming Richard Childress Racing does not appeal these penalties. I waited an extra couple hours to see if maybe RCR would announce something or release a statement this afternoon, but I got impatient. They haven't announced anything yet, so RCR may just let these penalties sit. We'll see what Richard Childress Racing decides, but man, another week, another massive penalty dominating the headlines. And it's another Chevrolet team. Have y'all noticed that? Between the Hendrick and Colleague Louvergate, a couple of Chevys, then Byron and Bowman with the greenhouse issue, whatever that was at the R&D Center, once again Chevrolet. Now Richard Childress Racing, very different Chevy teams, but still Chevrolet nonetheless. Not sure if there's any correlation there, if it's just a coincidence. Last year, many of the L2 penalties that we saw were given out to Ford teams. RFK, Front Row, Stewart-Haas. I'm sure it's all a coincidence, but maybe it's not. The bigger question I have, and this is why I'm waiting to hear what Richard Childress Racing says, is this a case of, yeah, the team knew they were beating around the bush, trying something that was borderline at best, and they just got caught? Or will this be another case of parts not fitting, the single source suppliers not giving them pieces that meet proper specifications? Will RCR appeal this, saying, hey, NASCAR, you gotta get control of your vendors, they're giving us bad equipment? That's what I'm waiting to hear. We don't know at this point, that's just speculation on my part, but that was part of Hendrick Motorsports, Colleague Racing's. That was part of their arguments. Hey, your vendors that, yeah, I guess we helped you choose, but you chose, are giving us pieces that sometimes don't meet spec. That's not our fault. How do we handle this? I'll be curious if Richard Childress Racing, should they appeal, if they cite any of the same issues Hendrick Motorsports did. Because that could speak to a bigger issue. That's not to say Richard Childress Racing didn't do anything wrong, but it would shine more light on issues with the single source suppliers, with the vendors who are supplying many of the spec parts for the next gen car. I don't want to speculate any further until we hear from Richard Childress Racing, should they choose to appeal, but that's the latest news. Another massive penalty handed down by NASCAR. Okay, perfect timing. Breaking news. Richard Childress Racing has now released a statement. We are disappointed in the penalty that NASCAR issued to Richard Childress Racing following the recent NASCAR Cup Series race at Martinsville Speedway and plan to go through the appeal process. I love Richard Childress Racing statement. The timing couldn't be any worse. Always short, sweet, and very honest. But there you go. They will appeal. I don't blame them. The appeals process has worked out pretty well for teams in recent weeks. They didn't give any details, so we still don't know if their issue is with the parts themselves. Their parts were wrong when we received them. We never touched them. Maybe that will be their argument. Now, with NASCAR's new rules, there's a chance that we will know why the appeal panel chooses to decide whatever they do whenever this appeal hearing is heard. But yeah, there you go. That's the latest from Richard Childress Racing. Moving on. Now, next, the big debate this week has been horsepower. It really hasn't been much of a debate. Pretty much every driver from Denny Hamlin to Joey Logano to Kevin Harvick, they've come out in recent days and said, hey, yeah, NASCAR, we need more horsepower, at least on the short tracks, to help us pass. The debate, or discussion, I guess, is more around whether it's possible to add horsepower to the next-gen car, and how soon, if it's possible, can it be done? Doug Yates, the CEO of Roush Yates Engines, who of course builds the engines for every Ford team in the NASCAR Cup Series, spoke to reporters today and he tackled some of these hot topics. He said, quote, yes, we could add more power, probably 50 to 100 horsepower without a lot of expense, in my opinion. I think we could do that pretty quickly. To go to 900 or 1,000, that's a whole other discussion. Oh, okay, so this is what I've been waiting for. We heard Denny Hamlin, Kevin Harvick, their drivers, of course, they're going to beg for more horsepower. We did hear Jeff Andrews, he's from Hendrick Motorsports, a race team. He said, yeah, we could add a lot more horsepower, but it would take a lot of time, many, many months to order the parts and make sure we got them in time to make those adjustments. Now we hear from an actual engine builder, or the CEO of said company, saying that, hey, right now, without too much work, we could add up to 100 horsepower, get back to, maybe the 750 range. That's big. That's huge. Unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily mean that a major change is coming soon, like middle of this season soon. Doug Yates was asked by reporter Bob Pockrass, Fox Sports, if NASCAR and the manufacturers ever discuss things like horsepower, and here's what Doug Yates said. Quote, I don't think that it's one of our bullet points that we discuss every meeting, no. It's more podcasts and media today. I think NASCAR's keenly aware of trying to make sure we're having the light powertrain at the track, we're keeping costs in mind, we're also keeping the future of the sport in mind with what would attract a new OEM to come into the sport. All those things are strategic discussions that we do have with NASCAR. So there you go. They aren't really talking about it, or at least they haven't been talking about it. Maybe now, with all the press that more horsepower has gotten this week, this will become a topic of discussion at one of their next meetings. So what can we make of these quotes? It sounds unlikely that NASCAR would change the horsepower mid-season. If it's truly as easy as Yates seems to imply there, to just add 100 horsepower, get back to at least 750, then maybe in time for 2024 we could see NASCAR, as they would say, pull this lever. But in the shorter term, if we're hoping to improve the on-track product at short tracks at least, it's way more practical to look elsewhere. Now, if you listened to the Dale Jr. download this week, you probably heard Dale Jr. give his thoughts, some of his suggestions as to what NASCAR could look at or consider changing. He talked about one area of the car that I really hadn't heard anyone else discuss. He credited Steve Letarte for this idea, but here's what Dale Jr. said. Quote, one thing you might be able to do is go to a much, much harder brake pad. A brake pad that intentionally performs poorly. They could institute a rule that this is the softest brake pad you can use. Another thing they could do is take the brake pads and take away surface area so that there's less pad material striking the rotor, and that will perform poorly. So Dale Jr. talking about the brakes. We've talked about the brakes. The next gen has bigger brakes. These cars stop a lot quicker than the old Gen 6 car did. But Dale Jr. is not talking about the actual brake assembly. Like, you can't fix that, at least not cheaply. Have to completely reinvent a whole element of the car. That would be very expensive. He's talking about just the brake pads. In theory, his ideas there make sense. Now, I have read some tweets from people who I think are a lot smarter than I am, at least on this topic, and they don't seem to believe this would work, or that it would unintentionally lead to way more brake failures during the race, and that I think would not be good. But if there's a way to implement something like this and add an element of strategy, teams have to set their cars up, drivers have to drive knowing that they need to conserve brakes the same way they conserve tires. If there's a way to do that, I think that'd be great. They should look into it. They should consider it. Sounds pretty cheap, all things considered. Could make a big difference. Then Dale Jr. discussed another area of the car that we've all talked about much more widely in recent days and weeks. He talked about the tires. Dale Earnhardt Jr. said, quote, "What they could do is design a tire that had grooves, a tire that had less rubber on the road. There would be some challenges with that because they will have to understand how those tires will dissipate heat, not blister, not chunk. Basically what you need to try to do is take tire off the road. Take the contact patch away from the racetrack. A grooved tire would certainly do that." Yes, grooved tires have been very trendy since I think Denny Hamlin first mentioned them on his podcast a few weeks ago. I talked to Christopher Bell earlier today, and you'll hear that interview tomorrow, but he also mentioned the possibility of grooved tires. So whether or not Goodyear is building some of those or they're planning to test some of those, I don't know, but in theory, grooved tires that don't have quite the same amount of grip that the current much wider, much larger next-gen tires do could be huge, could make a massive difference, especially at the short track. So a couple of interesting ideas there from Dale Earnhardt Jr. Not so sure about the brake pad idea. I've seen some conflicting tweets and reports and debates. Not sure if that would work, but the grooved tire debate or possibility. I know F1 once tried them, but F1 cars, NASCAR cars, very different style of racing, different tracks. I'm not really sure how much you can compare the two. I'm open to trying it. I'm open to trying anything. Anything that takes grip away, especially at short tracks, I believe will make the racing product there better. So we'll see if NASCAR does make any changes mid-season, if they do look into upping the horsepower. Ford seems to believe it's possible and wouldn't cost much money. We will see what NASCAR chooses to do, if not this season, maybe in time for next season. We'll have to wait and see. There aren't many short tracks coming up on the schedule in the near future, so this won't be a topic of conversation again for a while. We've got a super speedway with Talladega coming up. Dover's kind of its own 1 mile beast. Kansas is an intermediate. Darlington's coming up, so we won't have to talk short tracks for at least a little while. But anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Really appreciate you watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like. Helps the channel out a ton. And if you're new and you love NASCAR, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. More NASCAR content and some Out of the Groove merch can be found at dailydownforce.com. And thank you as always to my Patreon supporters for your very generous support. I will see you again very soon. Like I mentioned, Christopher Bell will join the show tomorrow. So I'll see you then. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, folks.